Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts, where today we got ourselves 6 tracks off of an album from Crux Cygnus titled Fight Fire. If we switch over to here, I'm not completely unfamiliar with this act. I've previously reviewed music from an act named Where the Children Play, and the person who's responsible for that project is doing this in tandem with their vocalist who does a lot of the clean vocals, titled Max. Apparently this is a Christian metal / easycore project, so that should be interesting to check out. We're going to listen through each of these 6 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. Starting with Shaddai, let's go, let's do it. Great vocal fry there. Great transition here to the floor to the floor. Very cool response between the growls and cleans. Kind of like the dancer's kind of electronic feel to it, despite being quite heavy with the metal. See, that was interesting. I was expecting the guitars to be a bit wider in the mix. It kind of seems like we might have some phasing in the middle of the stereo field. Aside from that, though, that's just something I want to get off my chest before we get into it. There's a lot to appreciate here that's quite positive. Just especially with those breakdown parts at the end, just disclosure. You know, I feel like you could have potentially gone wider with those recorded parts. I'm wondering if we double tracked them or not. But it's a cool track, Shaddai, track 1 off of Fight Fire. I assume, well, my understanding of how we would pair things with the album is that this is more about sort of like the power of God overcoming the sin and trying to sort of fight against all the things that are trying to sort of perversely affect the world and the people around us, and not being sort of like kind of like destroyed by it, you know, not allowing it the evil to take over. I think that's effectively what this is. And Shaddai, I'm not familiar with what Shaddai is. Oh, it can be translated as God Almighty. So it's Shaddai is God Almighty. So we're calling out to God in this time of need. Where I can appreciate there'd be, you know, given the Christian middle, you know, the labeling, the star, it makes total sense. The messaging, you know, I get what the messaging, I understand it. I think that people who resonate and appreciate this kind of thing will be able to sort of like find this track quite accessible for sure. But I also think exclusive to that, simply, you know, encouraging people to overcome their demons and just kind of like push forward is always a sort of a healthy approach. Because in this section, we're going to be providing an overall sort of like mini song conclusion from lyrics and vocals through to production, as well as an overall section or conclusion at the end. So just to continue past this, I think that's what the track is about. Again, the kind of call out to a higher power. I think the vocals, you know, you're going between those growls where we have solid vocal technique and we're distinctive and focused in our approach with those note choices that harmonize quite neatly, and with less melody granted than the cleaner vocals that are in the chorus section, but still nonetheless work themselves out well within the piece. You got the distorted guitars and the kind of harsher growls, that kind of gritty stuff suits the style very neatly. But then that extra bit of clean melody that you have being very comfortable in a hidden chest voice, I suppose, to kind of call and respond with those grittier vocals in the chorus is effective as well. We had clearer storytelling. The technique allowed most of the words to come through really clearly, which was neat. We had like some sort of like backed and additional vocal layers as well for a bit more size within the mix to adjust intensity. And overall, I feel like we told the story well within the form factor that we're in. So I think that in terms of the structure of the piece, you know, it was quite effective. There are a variety of different riffs and guitar, you know, drum chops and not, you know, bass lines to suit the piece there. We had synths and keys alongside that. We had this kind of halftime-ish part at the start with a mixture of triplet double kicks there with this kind of anthemic lead line over top there, playing a sort of a fun melody and sort of sequence there over top that made it seem kind of relatively epic. Having the vocals over top kind of remind me of a little like kind of like Parkway Drive and bands like that. But the later verse sections kind of giving me more of a input of kind of like In Flames and such. Great sort of alternate picked rhythm guitar playing there in the lower tunings, nice and heavy with, again, the kick, snare, and cymbal patterns, and like the octave chords that we had on guitars in the chorus sections to sort of further help to elevate it in a way that was effective. It was just really cool to go from like the halftime and then to go into like normal time between parts there to adjust the relative flow and pace of the track there and add sort of rhythmic sort of like diversity there. There's a sizzle to the vocals around that 3 mark that is kind of unexpected. I'm not sure why there's a mild distortion to it, but if we wanted that kind of affectation to it, it's fine. I think that the dreamy keys around it articulate some of the existing minor triads that we had within the main sort of progressions, and it's just a nice sort of foil or adjustment in comparison to a lot of the heavier, lower tuned guitar, bass, and drums exclusive of that. We do go on from that to build back into a final chorus section. It's not like we're completely absent to things outside of that, but it's just good to have that attempt at compositional dynamic range. That sub drop that you had at the 4 mark was nice and heavy. It's exactly what I would have wanted at that point. Just kind of smacked you in the teeth a bit. It was good to have that final sort of breakout there. Again, listening back on it, I still think the guitars needed to have been double tracked. They still seem a bit too close together in the stereo field. I was expecting them to be wider. Exclusive of that though, things in general are quite well presented. I like the clarity and the push of the drums, especially again those double kicks and sort of really like there's some really tight fill transitions across the toms. But yeah, there's enough variety within the different drum grooves and guitar riffs there to be appealing and effective, and ultimately I feel like it's quite well structured without a note out of place. This thematically minor oriented, because I think that we're more sort of focusing on the difficulties that we're having and asking the higher power to sort of help us get through those times, which I think makes a lot of sense there. If it had been major, it might have sort of belied things a little bit or betrayed some of the sort of heavy intentions there. We're not necessarily going for a power mid or acidic here. But nonetheless, again, a lot of the coloration comes from how some of those sung vocals with the legato passages and stuff like that coalesce with the surrounding elements. And ultimately, I think it was, again, colorful when it needed to be, relatively sort of more sort of percussive or rhythmic, the lower chugs and stuff like that when it needed to be a bit heavier. With alternate sub leads as well, such as the guitarist at the start. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering. Again, I've spoken about the double track guitar parts. Outside of that, basses, the drums, some of the keys and sort of synth parts we had as well are reasonably well sort of positioned around the stereo field, and frequency spectrum music surrounds you in the headphones. And there's no resonant frequencies at this point, like maybe like a little bit in like the 1 to 4 kilohertz area, but I think that could be the phasing from the guitar parts, as well as some of the vocal parts, but it could just be because we had that kind of stylized distortion on them. Ultimately though, nice and loud without pumping. And on to the next one, because we have I'm Only Human, track number 2. A lot of more poppy and so are they going from the fry into the clean vocals? Okay. Kind of a synthy kind of feel to the vocals as well. Fantastic tone to that sub bass though, really well measured. I mean, it follows the fundamentals of a solid metal track.
I was never meant to stand alone. You have claimed me as your own. Every weakness, every scar held within your healing arms. You took my sin upon the cross, turned my failure into loss. Now I live not by my might, but by your everlasting love. I'm only human. I can't.
Have we got like additional vocalists in the background? I can hear some lady vocalists in the top end. That was interesting. Alright, so that was I'm Only Human, track number 2. I think this song is more discussing how our own sort of imperfections and kind of accepting that we aren't completely limitless and that we maybe need a bit of help from time to time, effectively. I think that's what's going for, maybe following on from the previous track, Shaddai, is in that they've responded to us now. We're kind of looking at our own place and purpose within it, just trying to figuring that out. Yeah, made of dust, but you are holy. Yeah, so effectively we're looking at our own sort of like, you know, yeah, our us versus them sort of mechanic there, which I understand. I think the vocals going between the kind of growls to the clean parts is really interesting. You know, like it's a really effective use of technique there. It's cool to have so many different vocal styles within this. You have the choir parts and the chorus as well, which make it sound huge. And I like the way that they're spread out and sort of frequented. It's just neat to have that sort of lush depth and dimensionality to it. I mean, like, we have some compelling melodies that harmonize neatly. It's a far poppier track than Shaddai, which is an interesting choice because they've also got some really heavy breakdowns within this, like ample use of sub drops and the like. And I have no issues with that at all. I like my chugs and like my doofs and stuff like that. It's just the kind of A-B side to it does work quite well here. And I mean, within a 3.5 minute track, there's very little to know. There's no filler within it at all, really. And you got that kind of crowd chant, kind of hardcore-ish kind of vibe to a lot of it there. It's neat. There are, yeah, interesting vocal tones, just structurally quite effective as well. We have the similar instruments to what we had prior there with the mixture of guitar, bass, drums, etc. Again, a compelling lead line on top there, playing arpeggiated kind of picked melodies in like the top 3 strings, and then power chords kind of filling out the bottom 3. A little bit of legato technique, some slides, etc. Hammer-ons and pull-offs there. It's cool. It's cool. Really fast drum fills as well. The use of the toms and the double kicks as well is fantastic, and there's a great sense of, you know, knowing to play the drums in a similar sort of rhythm to the guitars and vice versa. There's chemistry between the instruments, and we go between like half time and double time, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's mostly normal times, I think half time and normal time most of the time. I think in the breakdown section around the 2-minute mark, for example, things go a bit more slowly, and you got the China cymbals and stuff like that to kind of really let it simmer. I think having another interlude around the 2-minute 30 mark with the keys sort of featuring as a softer layer is very similar to Shaddai in a certain extent. Going into the chorus afterwards is cool. I like that we've got a sort of a system set up for these tracks now. It'd be cool to hear some differently structured tracks, but I feel like both of these so far make sense. And that sort of breakdownish outro part there has got the kind of fun chugs you'd expect from an out, like a song where we've had so much pace there to contrast that by rigidity. There, a glacial kind of dun 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 dun. The tempo kind of is neat. You could have potentially put pinched harmonics in there, some squealies and stuff to really sort of elevate it, but aside from that, it's neat, you know, with some natural harmonics there for a bit of a kind of glow to it. It's an effective instrumental performance there. The bass very sort of loyal to the root notes, the chord progressions and such. I think we had several different chord progressions or bass lines throughout this track to sort of puncture and kind of create more compositional diversity through it. Nothing ever seemed too alien or unusual. You could distinguish which parts which fairly easily. And I do dig that there was just, again, that call and response, that feedback between the main and the side vocals, and then they came together sometimes as well. It was just nice to have the vocal layers work together with being aware of how they needed to fit in with everything else. I mean, like, again, it's just nice and heavy, sort of tonally with those guitar parts there. They've got a nice sort of like low end to them with the palm muting. Thematically, it's minor leaning, but it features the major a lot of the time, and the pace and energy behind it seems quite uplifting, and like we're celebrating, you know, despite being human, the fact that we have someone who can potentially take care of us, you know. I dig that. I think that's really cool. I like when, you know, you have a non-cheesy key signature, because the major can be cheesy depending on how you approach it. But then you also try and sort of like find a way of emotional equilibrium within it. Like, it's more we're moving forward and trying to make gains and stuff like that, as opposed to sort of wasting away or loitering in uncertainty. The minor key, but the chord progressions and the way we're exploring things makes a lot of sense in terms of the tempo, and generally I feel like the vocals and lyrics make sense with the instrumental parts as well. A studio recording, mixing and mastering, similar comments to the previous one. Those sub drops though are just sounding really good. I like how they fill out the stereo field there really neatly. They're just that ample bit of extra push when you need them to go between parts. And even though there are a lot than this one, I still don't feel that they were overplayed. It's a different sounding track to the previous one, but they do have a sense of stylistic consistency, at least with some of the textures and tones. It'd be good to check out more. Because we have Fight Fire, track number 4 off of the album. No, it's cool. I like the technicality. And the machine gun kicks are pretty wild.
Flames rise up, the sky turns black. Hell breathes down, there's no turning back. Pressure builds, the furnace calls, but I stand firm when the darkness falls.
It's like, how do I say this? It's like the drums are super fast, but I don't know if they necessarily needed to be as fast as they are a lot of the time. It's cool that we want to put the 30 seconds in there, or 16th triplets in there, but I just don't know how much it actually adds to it if you do it more than a couple of times per bit, you know? That's a bit better, yeah. A bit more rhythmic variety there. Kind of mixed like a house track with the side chaining of those kicks. That was a clean line. Yeah, interesting. That's an interesting transition there, because it kind of maybe needed to just stop moving completely to have more of a hit when it switched. Having the hi-hats continue kind of makes it seem like it's part of the same thing, just a lot quieter. Great delays there, great echoes. Yeah, okay, so let's talk about that one. So Fight Fire, I thought that it was about fighting fire with fire, using your faith as a weapon to combat a lot of the problems and issues that you're facing. You know, I think that makes a lot of sense from like a story perspective, especially, or narrative perspective, especially with what we've had so far throughout this album with I'm Only Human and Shaddai. Things follow on neatly. I assume that track number 3 onwards, because we're going to go to number 6 next. We're skipping a few tracks from now on. That there'll be like a chronological story that we're following that kind of works in sort of sequence. It's still good though. In isolation, I think Fight Fire communicates quite well. The chorus is enough to sort of get the main crux of it, and then the verse is that additional bit of context there for those who are like super interested or who are reviewing music and then need a second time through, just kind of like really get the nuances there. Again, some compelling vocal melodies in the hook sections. No complaints from my end in terms of how we communicate. We had our kind of growls and sort of like harsher sort of vocal takes for some parts, and then we went into our sung elements for others. We had some cool responses there to kind of fill in space and be subleads, which was nice. You know, we tell the story when we need to. I think that the aggression in the vocals details the frustration that we feel or the anger that we feel about the situation. And I think that, you know, the sung vocals are more sort of trying to sweetly call out to people to help them rise up and get into the position where their faith elevates them as well. And there were some really cool high notes that we hit there that resonate really nicely around everything else that's going on within the track. You got, again, more guitar, bass, and drums here. Structurally, I don't think there's any filler within this. If there was anything that I wasn't super sure about, it was the drums themselves. I appreciate that we have really fast double kicks. I would potentially venture that there were maybe too many kicks. I feel like just the way they were mixed, as well as the way that they were sort of like written, it's just a lot. We could have potentially have been less machine gunnish about those kicks. There was a similarity to the way that they were played, which made them seem the same loudness, and that can be a bit disconcerting and distracting from other elements of the arrangement when you're listening through a piece, especially when, oh, we're going to do those again. They kind of dominate and sidechain like that. It's kind of the risk you run when you're sidechaining kicks in metal, especially when you've got a drum kit is working with like a 4 to the floor kind of thing, 1, 2, 3, 4 for a large part of the track. It's just kind of running the risk of that quarter note thing becoming a 30-second and it just kind of barreling through. I thought the kind of genty feel to the start of the piece though with the guitars was great. The rhythm section, the 8 strings going into down low end, kind of alternate picking some notes on those strings there. It's nice with the zeros and the palms, etc. It's got a great sort of on-beat, sort of syncopated kind of like on-off pattern to it, which was nice. Some of the guitar lead parts as well earlier in the piece are absolutely ridiculous. I mean, that first initial part with the tapping though, with the drum fill at the start was pretty wild. I'm just listening back to it. A lot of those kind of riffs that you had a bit later on are a bit more sort of achievable. It's just a nice kind of sassy lead line that catches your attention, especially if you're feeling a bit more sort of secure in this, say throwing a new sort of spanner into works with these solos. But we do have a far more palatable chorus though that prioritizes the power chords, some of the octaves that you had as per previous tracks, and then you have the bass and drums being very supportive with the mixed chord 8th and 16th, and then the fills as well being 30 seconds or 30-second triplets. It's just a crazy variety of rhythms on display there. I thought that the breakdown, again with machine gun kicks going into the hi-hat section was good. I don't know if I was a little bit too harsh on that before. It's just more that like, it's tricky as well, because I think if you had a complete pause, it might have been a little bit too generic sounding as well. It's kind of a tricky thing to try and figure out, okay, how do we go from something that's relatively heavy down to a low point before we kind of rise back up again for the rest of the piece? It's just trying to find an equilibrium there. I think like I understand why we did it. I feel like going for a focus on those 16-note hi-hats was probably smarter than, it wasn't a bad decision. That kind of clap at the end kind of sounds like a gunshot. Like fire with fire, you fired your gun. I thought that was a nice touch. I'm not sure if that's deliberate. There could just be the natural snare resonance on its tail. But yeah, really interesting start to the track structurally with the different guitarists, varying sort of like flavors of kind of like sub-lead. It's a track where, you know, there's enough time to sort of explore the context of the lyrics there, but it also tries to get certain messages stuck in your head. Thematically minor oriented, which makes total sense here. This isn't a happy decision that we're having to fight fire in the first place, but as the Scythe titled off of this album, I can get behind that. I understand what we're trying to accomplish here. I think effectively the use of minors with some melodica harmonic minors outside of the natural was just a fun sort of twist on it. It had a bit more sort of like bit of a sassy flair to it, you know. We've been very used to the diatonics, the natural major minors at this point. And it makes listening through the choruses, which are far more conservatively kind of approached in terms of not having a whole lot of really spicy notes, a lot more easy to follow. I think we had some Phrygian kind of stuff, flat seconds as well, I'm not sure. But either way, still, like, you know, lots of different ideas, fun ideas on the guitar especially, as well as the drums just going absolutely manic at times. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, I just feel like that everything, you know, the guitar, bass, drums, vocals, etc. are well put forward for the most part. I just think that maybe the drums are like a little bit too present in certain perspectives. But that's okay. You know, like most of the time the drums have been pretty well behaved. I think maybe it's just this track, unless we tried to do a lot more with other ones. But we'll see how we go. We got track number 6, Your Goliath. Kind of a honky tone to the lead, but you know, it's good. Almost sort of trivia-ish.
I see the shadow standing tall, a giant screaming for my fall. Armor of fear, voice of lies, mocking face before my eyes. 9 feet of doubt, force and rage, calling me out to step in the cage. But I'm not armed with sword or shield. I carry truth that will not yield. You train my hands, you set my aim. I walk in power of your name. Face your Goliath, do not fear. The living God is standing here. Stone and sling, faith ignites. Giant fall and kingdom light. Face your Goliath, he will break. No weapon formed can seal your fate. Stand your ground, do not run. The battle's won by the sun.
I do like the guitar riff. Da 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 da.
He laughs at me, says I'm too small, but heaven's roar is overall. Not by strength and not by might, but by your spirit I will fight. 5 smooth stones and a steady hand, not by chance, but by your plan. One release, the earth will shake. One command, the strongholds break. You go before me, clear the way. Your voice is thunder in the fray. Face your Goliath, do not fear. The living God is standing here. Stone and sling, faith ignites. Giants fall and kingdom light. Face your Goliath, he will break. No weapon formed can seal your fate. Stand your ground, do not run. The battle's won by the sun.
The battle's won by the sun.
Strike in the name of the Lord. Strike not by flesh but by the sword. Strike, let the giant fall dead. Victory written.
Yeah, okay.
Enemy fled.
It would have been kind of cool, I think, to have just like that's a previously established chord progression. Dun 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 dun. Like it's a safe option, but I just feel like you could have potentially have gone for like a diminished chord there, or like something a bit kind of edgier to kind of really kind of make that sizzle.
You are my strength when I am weak. The voice of truth when lies still speak. From shepherd's field to battlefield,
Wait, so they see your Goliath. So the Goliath has been toppled by God, is that it? By Shaddai. I like the imagery there. It kind of reminds me of sort of Greek mythology a little bit, with the Titans. You know, how the gods and Titans fought. It's interesting. Interesting stuff. There's some interesting stories that go on, you know. I feel like the music is like open and flexible enough to be able to get away with discussing a lot of this stuff. When you've got a lot of these sort of like religious themes in there incorporated across of similar sounding sort of like riffs and effects and stuff like that, you just kind of, you feel like you're in a war zone with this stuff. And like, you look at the art, to be fair, you know, it does look like they're in a war zone, fight fire, you know, so it's totally fine. I mean, like, your Goliath, I think it's effectively discussing the fact that even though we're faced with an indomitable foe, there is someone standing here with us to be able to overcome this perilous and you know, adversary. And I just think that is neat. I think that for people who sort of relate to that and sort of follow along with it, it's music they'll be able to get, a messaging that they'll be able to get behind and appreciate. I think that's really cool. I mean that in a non-patronizing sense. I mean that sincerely. You know, I think it's cool. I like the storytelling. I haven't really got a lot more to sort of add in regards or into comparison to previous tracks. You know, we're comfortable with our vocal range. We go neatly from our frying growls to vocals. We have some nice call and responses, etc. We harmonize neatly with surrounding elements. These are similar comments to what I've had in prior tracks, primarily because the consistency across these is pretty effective. I do like when we allow ourselves just to sit with the melodies within the vocals there and really sort of like allow them to resonate. But I do also think, again, that the harshness of some of the growled vocals does suit the distorted guitar parts that we have. It was also nice to have like an extended solo or lead section there with the guitars around the 2:50 mark, where the vocals didn't feel the need to garner further exposition there. They just allowed it to play out, you know. Quite a complicated riff at the start on a guitar though. This track is 4 minutes 12 to be fair, you know. If you go past 4 minutes, you need to be wary of how much you're repeating stuff in order to not overplay things. I like that the opening riff we had on the guitar, you know, like it starts after you know, that which reminds me a lot of kind of the early 2010s Periphery stuff with some of the fills like they had with songs, like Ziggle Rocks or something like that. I could be wrong. But just like the use of the palm muting and it's just a really colorful, chirpy little riff there that has a filtering in it that allows it to sit neatly on top of the syncopated and occasional rhythm guitar, bass, and drum parts. We go back into a more sort of familiar territory of power chordal in flames-ish kind of rhythm sections with the drums playing these really perky sounding fills after a while, but I do appreciate when we have that complexity lead lines on the strings, especially as a lot of the complexity throughout the track appears to be the drums. We have a similar focus on the choruses with the pads, working with the guitar riffs and everything like that, and decorating the freak spectrum really neatly with some of the keys or pads or the like going in the mid to upper ranges, and the rhythm guitar, bass, and drums working towards the mids and lows. Things are well spaced out. There's no weird resonant frequencies. It's very sort of comfortable composition. That halftime section around a 2:35 mark before the little Me's guitar solo section is just a nice slowdown after the quarter note feel that we've had throughout the vast majority of this track so far. You know, we're pushing along, nodding our head to it, that kind of house-ish kind of feel to the quarter note accents. And we've got this kind of repeated chord progression, as I mentioned there at interlude, which again, I feel like you could have been a bit more kind of bratty or abrasive with, but they didn't want to do that, and that's fine. Having these little interludes with the toms that I hear occasionally, I think I've heard it in previous tracks, just allowing the toms to be a kind of something to fill the ether in lieu of the crashes, kicks, and snares during those bridge or transition sessions or build sections is just kind of nice, because we know we're going to get kicks, crashes, and sort of cymbals within those hook sections. It's just cool to know to use a different part of the drum kit, even if we're using similar parts of the other instruments, to further infer a sort of a further variety within the track itself. And they're slower as well. They're not the same speed as those faster double kicks, showing an understanding of when to use these rhythms and when to not. Really heavy finish to it as well, the boom, 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 the thing's just sort of petering out there. It's very authoritative in its approach to its starts and finishes there. The track comes in, it's bombastic, it's anthemic, and then we're done. Thematically, minor leaning there, but it's trying to be quote-unquote epic sounding. And I mean, like, not in the I don't think it sounds epic, because it clearly sounds huge, but it's more like it's trying to sort of lift you up and sort of inspire you to continue pushing forward with. And I think with the mixture of the different guitar, bass, drum, and key and vocal parts there, they soar, man. It's just a great sort of pulse to it. It's very catchy, and we don't have any real harsh edges to it outside of the little distorted guitar tones, some of the vocal parts as well. Ultimately, there's nothing there. I mean, like, I think there's some chromatics potentially in that intro lead section. And in the previous tracks, I think like maybe 5/5 there were as well. Just some sort of spicy harmonical melodics there to kind of switch things up a little bit. But in the sections where we need it to be, again, more palatable and more easy to follow along to, we stick to the minor scale or minor key there. I think that's sensible, you know. You got to have like a palate cleanser, but also got to remain consistent. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering. Typically, things are sort of well leveled within the mix. I've got no real complaints about the way things are presented outside of what I've mentioned earlier with some of the panning decisions there. There is some interesting sort of like stylization of the vocals there. It's like got a very kind of poppy kind of synthy feel to them. And I kind of dig it. I feel like we're unapologetic about that. We already kind of have the grittiness of the harsher vocal styles there, so they kind of contrast each other neatly in a way that doesn't seem like distracting. It's very pretty sounding, for example, in that 3:10 section where you've got the chords holding there with the hi-hats and stuff like that. It's rather delicate. Like, it's quite delicate. It's cool. Before that big kind of like dun 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 crescendo with the snares and you just going through that hook one more time. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering. Similar comments to previous tracks. Aside from panning, just again, the accents on those quarter notes really do allow the track to kind of fly along. It's got a great pace to it. I like when there's a lack of kicks because things slow down and there's that sort of difference in the feel there. It's quite tight in terms of the production dynamic range. But I think we just really wanted that kind of dictation to it. It's nice to see different filterings of instruments have slightly different tones and textures to present them differently in the mix as well. Yeah, okay, time for track number 5 for today, which is track 9 off of the album, Rebuke, Restore. What have we got? We like these kind of riffs. Kind of remind me heavily of the Periphery vocalist. There are some of those highs. And that big sub drop at the end, nice. Rebuke, restore. Okay, I kind of understand this one. So we go from the perspective of we do not accept what is being presented to us, and we push towards trying to find a better future that is more in line with what we believe and what we feel should occur. Is that kind of what we're going for with this? I could be wrong. Feel free to let me know if I'm incorrect. That's my understanding within a first impression perspective. I thought the vocals in this one pretty good for the most part. There are some notes in here that were hidden in that top end, and they're really high notes. And we still have a bit of vocal fry in those ones. I don't think we'd be able to go much higher than that though, without them sounding a little bit too high, you know? So I'm glad that we kind of found the top of our range and we're able to sort of make it sustainable. We have the growls and the crowd chants and more of that. It's a very similar sounding track to previous ones. I think we've clearly found a niche or a way of doing this genre that is our sort of clear preference, and I feel like it's more about the story nowadays as opposed to having specific different tracks to suit different moods and riffs and stuff like that, you know? You have the similar kind of really perky drum fills and riffs and chops and quarter note kind of 4-to-the-floor patterns for those verses, and the halftime chorus drums that we've had in previous tracks with triplets and really kind of frenetic fills. You have that continued kind of diversity of experiences there. You have the hi-hats kind of bringing us in the interlude section as well in a way that's very similar to previous tracks. You have guitar arpeggios and sort of really crazy kind of like quick like lead lines, but also power chord elements on the rhythm sections there that oscillate and vary between parts. You know, it's depending on the track and what we're trying to do. We have power chordal palm mutes, for example, underneath those vocal parts, should I say, to allow the vocals to have more presence. And like ultimately, I feel like, you know, you can nod your head along to it and appreciate the musicality of it. There's nothing in here which is particularly confrontational harmonically. I think we're trying to make sort of pretty sounding music that's more sort of like catchy metal that is easier to kind of follow along with and sort of appreciate and sort of be inspired by. We have the kind of, I mean, I can't do it justice, but you've got those sung vocals, the chants over top of that intro section after those initial guitar riffs. And I just think that's a fun idea. Just harmonically is like more of an instrumental musical layer, a sub lead, as opposed to having that guitar kind of bend over it or something like that. It's just nice to have a different representation of the vocals at that point, you know. We have verses and choruses and bridge section and interludes, and then that outro chorus at the end there with the chug based on previous parts of like the first track. And ultimately it's very sort of like familiar if you're at this point of the album. We use our sort of toms and like fill build sections and stuff like that to kind of create tension and add a different sort of feel to the cymbals there, simply because we know that if we have too much of one thing, we get too used to it. And there's enough coloration going on behind the chants and sort of vocal takes there to be able to sort of fill the frequency spectrum neatly, whilst offering enough rhythmic diversity through the piece. And yeah, similar comments again to previous tracks. The tapped parts that you have in that interlude around 2:50 though, I kind of need there. I like that you can kind of hear a different legato passage or situation there as opposed to what we had prior, unless it's like just like a slower version of the initial tap riff. And that little riser that we have at the end of the piece there before we go doosh, kind of fade ourselves out was kind of neat as well. Thematically, a minor leaning there with the key signature, but yeah, it's minor leaning. Similar comments I've said about try not to be sort of like down on the drums or detrimental about it through the use of the normal time and the speed and tempo of the track being such that it doesn't feel too dire or dreary despite the subject matter. It's more trying to sort of push you to get pumped up about it, I suppose, if that was to make sense thematically there, with the wide range of shades of the minor key or scale present. I think the glow and balance of things within the frequency spectrum kind of helps in that regard as well as the speed of certain bits. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, it's just a situation where so much stuff is in the center of the stereo field that I kind of wish that it was more spread out. Like again, if there are double track guitar parts, and if they're not that side, if they're not actually on the side of the, I might be listening. It just sounds like the guitars are too close to the center of the rhythm parts. So therefore, when you've got everything there, some of the lead elements are a bit more subtle than they would be otherwise. Ultimately, though, still aside from that, I've already mentioned the panning thing before, and it's almost exclusively the guitars because there are some parts which are wider than I'd expect as well. No, well handled. 5 for 5. Track number 11, New Flowers on Old Graves. sorry to interrupt. I'm gonna be very quick about this because I know that it's already been a long review, but it's like a breath of fresh air. It's like water in an oasis, or in a desert. An oasis in a desert, should I say. Just hearing different instruments with an interesting, unexpected intro is just really, it's like a great palate cleanse.
Back to where I used to be. Cold stones marked my history. Names of sins I thought would stay buried deep but not erased. Old wounds whisper through the ground, echoes of my former sound. Shame still tried to call my name from the dirt where I once laid. But you met me in that place, spoke new life over the grave. New flowers on old graves. Your mercy rewrites my name. What was dead is not the same. You have called me out of the grave. I remember who I was, lost in darkness, bound in dust. Every step led to decay, every breath just slipped away. But your voice broke through the stone, rolled it back and called me home. Where I fell, you made me stand, life restored by scarred hands. Death no longer has a claim, you have taken all my shame. New flowers on old graves. Your mercy rewrites my name. What was dead is not the same. You have called me out of the grave. Soft the wind, your spirit moves through the soil, making new. Where there once was rot and pain, now your beauty will remain. You redeem what time it scarred, turn broken ground to something pure. New flowers on old graves. Your mercy rewrites my name. What was dead is not the same. You have called me out of the grave. Take up what I used to be, nail into the cross for me. Rise in resurrection light, live in you made raw. No more chains.
Okay, normal time. Good job.
I've been given second birth. Every grave I thought was mine now stands as a holy sign. From the past I've been released by the blood that speaks of peace. New flowers on old graves. Your
Yeah, okay.
mercy rewrites my name. What was dead is not the same. You have called me out of the grave. From decay to holy ground, grace is made a garden now. New flowers on
So I'm going to try and be gentle with this one, because I try to be constructive with this. Objectively, I'll go through it in order. So I thought that New Flowers and Old Graves had a really pleasant, pretty message to it. It's basically finding a new lease of life, I suppose, trying to flourish under the guidance or observance of someone else, a higher power. Looking back at your old life and trying to find a new one with this new, brighter future in mind. I think that's kind of what it's about, if I'm not mistaken. I think all the stuff you go through in Fight Fire is to get to a point where you're effectively reborn. And so I think that there, again, for people, especially like, for example, born-again Christians or something like that, my limited understanding of it is that might resonate in that response. And I think if that's cool, that's good. Like, genuinely it is. I didn't like the fuzz, the kind of distortion on the vocal takes. And the song is clean enough, or it's like, with the strings as well, it just seemed a bit distracting to have the fuzziness on the tone of the vocals. So I'll say it. I just didn't necessarily like that on them. The note choices that we chose, the full sort of choir kind of singing along with it was great. It was nice to have all the different people involved there, and we explore our range well. There was enough range vocally outside of my feelings about some of the tones and textures to sort of communicate the message, I think. And it made the most of the longer form factor of 5 minutes, I think. Although you could have potentially added alternate lead layers or additional leads, like maybe a guitar solo behind the vocals in that last chorus or something like that, just to further sort of bring them up, because it was, but aside from that, it's okay. It's all good. That was such a beautiful sounding key element. I just like the pattern, the idea that we put forward. And for the strings to come in after that, or while it was going through it, to kind of elevate and add a bit of romanticism to it, almost in memoriam, was just really, really kind of touching. I don't really think we've had that in this album so far. It might be with other tracks, but I just feel that's very well done. And they're so lush, the strings in that section, in that mid-range there. It just sounds so full of life. I imagined would go in a similar sort of like direction as we have with the previous tracks, but it was its own sort of piece. And I think it's just a nice way to end the albums from like a storytelling perspective, because you get that kind of conclusion, I suppose, of your journey into the new life. But it also just adds a bit of extra flavor with these new layers and kind of makes it a bit more sort of sophisticated. When you had the strings kind of dancing and flirting alongside the guitars, bass, and drums, it was just a different song. And I think that's just why it was so refreshing to me, because I was kind of looking for that diversity through the album, even though I understand that there are a lot of really cool ideas across a lot of the more consistent instruments. It was just nice to have a new kind of like environment and combination to be a part of. I think ultimately a lot of the fundamentals we've had throughout this album, again with the palm muted guitars through the verses there, allowing ourselves to kind of sit on top of those crash hi-hat and kick parts were good. I liked that the drums weren't nearly as active within this one. I don't think it would have made a lot of sense for the balladesque kind of format that we put forward. I think that having the strings kind of like build us up and explore the high end and some of the more sort of like anthemic parts was really cool as well. It really kind of flourished. I think that around that 4 minute mark, 3:50 mark, going into normal time with a lot of the song in halftime was just a great sort of decision as well. It was like, oh, we're suddenly speeding up into something. What is this? So that was cool as well. I dig that a lot. I just think it's really, it's just subverting expectations. Granted, we do go back into the halftime of that final chorus, so we kind of go full circle, but it was just nice to have a bit of an adjustment there rhythmically, And I think that, I wouldn't have enjoyed this as much without the piano and strings. I feel like, wow, again, there were some really cool ideas. It would have been a little bit too safe without those extra parts. It was nice to have the keys sometimes just with the vocals. It was nice to have the crowd vocals by themselves for transfers, to have their own sort of space, because I understood that it would have been too busy otherwise. Sensible decision making there. There's nothing objectively new, aside from like an additional sub lead, maybe in the outro chorus section thing. I think it's fine. It's okay. Thematically, I think it's major leading there, which makes sense considering we're discussing the joy or the celebration of being born a new life or reborn, new flowers and old graves. So that makes sense there, I don't think we're having the same struggle we had with the previous tracks as it's post-struggle there. And I think finishing on a kind of happy ending there and communicating that with a far gentler vocal styling in addition to the backing vocalists kind of like going along with that is neat. And there might have been some extensions, but predominantly I think it was just sort of triad based, split across different instruments. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, again, I just wasn't a massive fan of the vocal tone, texture and timbre. It kind of worked with some of the harder tracks, but I just feel it was a bit too naked on this sort of cleaner track. Outside of that though, the guitar, vocals, piano, strings, drums, etc. were well positioned. I feel like they were appropriate with the lesser intensity for the sort of like atmosphere I was trying to build. It sounded like an old school, no, not an old school ballad. But it sounded like it was trying to facilitate a different, more gentle, tender environment than previous tracks. And I think considering the subject matter, again, that's sensible. We're going to talk about these tracks more in the conclusion, because welcome to the conclusion of my review of these tracks off of an album from an act named Crux Cygnus, titled Shaddai, I'm Only Human, Fight Fire, Your Goliath, Rebuke, Restore, and then New Flowers on Old Graves. In this section, I'm going to be providing an overall analysis of what I heard in this album, from lyrics and vocals all the way through to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But first of all, what do we think this album is about? I think this album is about being sort of like protecting your faith, having faith in the higher power, appreciating and accepting what they are to you, showing reverence, breaking through the difficulties and chains that are weighing you down, and then eventually I think being reborn after overcoming the adversity, you know, knowing that God is by your side to kind of try and live a new life, being reborn again. I think that's effectively what this track is about. Or this album is about, should I say. I reviewed 6 of the tracks there, but I'm filling in the gaps with what I've heard from the last to the first to last track there, and I think it makes sense to me. I feel like there's an audience of people. I think in general, you know, knowing someone's looking out for you is like a universal thing. It's quite nice to imagine someone's looking at you and trying to sort of like look out for your best interests, regardless of how you lean theologically. So it's nice. I like the point of the album. I think it's great. Vocally, I think for the most part, it was done really well. We had some interesting sort of like growled vocals and some sort of like fryish parts and some group vocals. There seemed like a few different people involved with the octave phrasings of those. We had clean vocals with some really pretty melodies. We had some cool response between those different sections. And I typically think that it fit the hardcore styling really neatly, whilst having some sort of heavier metal, kind of new metal elements, like kind of In Flames, just kind of stuff. But also we did ballads such as New Flowers and Old Graves. We had the range there in terms of our expression to be able to handle that. There were no off notes. There were some notes which seemed like they were getting a little bit out of our sort of range at some point. But aside from that, everything was handled pretty well. I think it was a sustainable sort of like growl technique. I will say that I feel like the vocals could have been a bit cleaner sounding in New Flowers and Old Graves, so I assume that's potentially a production-based thing. There was just a bit of fuzz to it that I wasn't necessarily sure if I was vibing with in the kind of track that we were working with here, where it was a bit cleaner. The other ones were like a lack of the intense kind of distortion and kind of heavy stuff that we had in previous tracks. But ultimately, I feel like the vocals were handled across the board for the most part. You know, they told the stories they needed to. They expressed, like, there was angst and tension and intensity behind it. I don't necessarily know that we always did it in a way that you could follow along to emotionally or emotively, but nonetheless, you know, the stanzas, you know, the lyrics made sense. They were easy to sort of follow along to and get behind. And yeah, it worked. I just think it was great to allow the vocals to take a break sometimes to appreciate some sort of like guitar solos or sub leads there, you know. It's nice. It's cool. And I just feel like, you know, there was enough variety there on the microphone to sort of like pull it off. Structurally, the tracks range from about 3.5 minutes to 5 minutes. And I feel like for the most part, they were well sort of handled with the verses and choruses and bridges and interludes and occasional solo sections, intros, outros, as well as some breakdowns. There's even like a little orchestral, like a piano and string part to New Flowers and Old Graves, which I kind of appreciated, which was an interesting foil to previous parts. We had a mixture, like our main elements or our main instruments were guitar, bass, drums, and there were some synthy kind of key elements as well throughout a lot of these. And I feel like that was enough. If I talk about each of these instruments, you know, individually, the guitarist played a variety of different power chord elements, octave chords. There were some very shreddy kind of tapped licks and lead lines and such. There were some really fast solo patterns and lead lines, but then there was also some more sort of measured ones when we needed more of a kind of a catchy alt lead there that wasn't trying to sort of like show up the vocals too much. The vocals were clearly the focal point throughout this album. And then the sort of songs like New Flowers and Old Graves there, we sung in a way which was a bit more sort of tender there that I feel the piano was better suited to. I think that the keys with the triads and sort of note choices they played were not too overcomplicated. We tried to avoid any sort of like clashy chromatics or anything like that. There might have been extensions, but they were relatively subtle. Some of the sort of key or synth ideas that we had as backgrounds to some of the hook sections and the songs, they elevated by emphasizing the mid and upper range there. And it was just fun. It was just fun to sort of like listen as enjoy those at that point and not have it the entire time to allow those verse elements with again the palm muting on the guitars to be heavier sounding. I think that the bass, when it was there, was typically well measured. It wasn't as visible or audible as I was potentially expecting, but you could definitely tell it was chugging along. The drums were interesting. I wasn't always super thrilled with them, not because I think they were performed badly. There's some crazy technical machine gun double kicks going on here, but it's more that sometimes it occasionally felt like too much. Like it seemed like we were doing 30-second or 16 triplets quite a lot to a point where it almost was like we were using it as more an effect rather than an occasional bit of kind of spice within the track. And because of how dominant they were, because of the way they chain things, it would start to become just a little bit too kind of pushy, I suppose. There were tracks like Fight Fire or I'm Only Human where maybe that was occurring there, but like in songs like New Flowers and Old Graves, the drums were more sort of gentle. We had a range of tom fill patterns as well with certain parts. We were comfortable with our hi-hat cymbals during the interludes on several tracks, and we mixed up our sort of normal time and half times really neatly between parts within tracks there in a way that was meaningful. But yeah, there were some really incredible fills and transitions between the toms and stuff like that, and very quick. And I like the breakdowns as well, the heaviness, especially with the sub drops and stuff like that. It's just sometimes it was almost just too much drums. Like it was like they were trying to be a solo instrument as opposed to like a rhythm section within the piece without it being a pertained drum solo section, you know what I mean? But yeah, and the strings that we had within New Flowers and Old Graves were just very elegant and a nice sort of Disney-esque kind of like accompaniment to the keys there. They added a bit of kind of mid-range warmth there. We could have potentially had them in other sections as well, but it's totally fine. We might have also had them in other tracks, I'm not sure. But regardless, instrumentally, for the most part, things fit really well, neatly made sense. Thematically, minor leaning for the most part, outside of, New Flowers and Old Graves, which was a more of a happy kind of twist to the things because we were reborn and we kind of found a new, brighter future, I suppose. So chord progressions, key signatures, etc., like matched well with the vocal style of the lyrics of what we were discussing there, and things came together really neatly without a note out of place. It's just, yeah, you could have potentially had like a couple, like extra lead layer at Flowers, but aside from that, I think typically it was, and the drums were typically good. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering. I just wish the guitars were a bit wider. Outside of that, I feel like the vocals were quite present. There was some tuning on the clean vocals, which was good. They definitely hit the notes. The growled vocals had a nice presence to them. Yeah, the guitar, bass, drums, keys, strings, etc. were mostly nicely wide in the stereo field. There were no weird resonant frequencies in the frequency spectrum as far as I was aware. Maybe there was like a little bit of a resonance on 1 to 4 on some bits which were like a tiny bit shrill, but aside from that, it's okay. There was a bit of dynamic range to it from a production and composition perspective, which was good and nice and loud, definitely pumping, bus compression, limiting is handled. I've already discussed the applicable constructive critique in terms of the range of the guitars and the stereo field. It just doesn't seem like the guitars were double tracked with different takes. They sound like they're phasing in the middle on certain parts there, and so that kind of fills up the stereo field in a way where it's kind of difficult to discern certain parts in the center, especially when it gets quite busy. I've spoken about the tone of the vocals in like Flowers and Old Graves and how they kind of they're a bit of like kind of fuzz to them that I didn't necessarily vibe with. From a general listener's perspective, I understand that this will appeal to people who are sort of like of the faith, and I think that there's enough hopeful elements in here to sort of resonate with people exclusive of that. I did like a lot of the ideas here, even though it wasn't a complete positive review. I did like a lot of the ideas there, and I wish everyone involved the best of luck in future, because thank you for watching my review of these tracks off of the album titled Fight Fire from Crux Cygnus. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias and the YouTube page. Stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they need the help more than ever. Thought of crazy stuff going on in the world, and I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.